You can say it right now without thinking. Go ahead. Start it in your head. Our Father, which art in heaven. And watch how fast the words come. You don't reach for them. They're already there. You learned them before you understood them, and you've said them so many times that the saying has worn a groove in you, smooth and automatic, like a stone rubbed soft by a river. That's the problem, because a prayer you can say without thinking is a prayer you've stopped hearing. And this one, very likely the most spoken prayer in human history, said by more people in more languages across more centuries than almost any string of words ever assembled, this one was never meant to be smooth. When it was first spoken out loud, on a hillside in Galilee, to a crowd of farmers and fishermen with dirt under their nails, it did not comfort them. It stopped them cold. Every single line broke something they thought they knew. They thought they knew how to talk to God. He gave them a word no one had dared to use. They thought they knew who God was. He turned the whole picture upside down. They thought they knew what to ask for. He told them to ask for things that could get a man killed under Roman rule. And hidden inside it, buried in the one line you think is the simplest, the most harmless line in the whole prayer, there is a single word that no one had ever written down before. Not a rare word, not an old word, a word that, as far as anyone can find, did not exist in the Greek language until this prayer put it there. For 2,000 years, translators have argued about what it means. We will get to that word, but not yet. Here's what I want you to do first. For the next 25 minutes, I want you to forget that you know this prayer. This is not a lesson about prayer techniques. This is not a formula for getting what you want. This is not a ritual to recite when you don't know what else to say. This is the story of a few dozen words that a carpenter's son spoke on a hill, a handful of lines designed to detonate, one at a time, everything a person assumes about God, money, forgiveness, and power. The crowd that day had asked him a simple question. One of them, maybe a fisherman named Peter, maybe John, men who'd grown up watching every teacher hand his students a signature prayer, had said, "Lord, teach us to pray." They wanted a technique, a method, something to recite. What they got instead was a small bomb with a 2,000-year fuse. And most of us are still holding it, without knowing it's lit. So say it one more time, slowly. Our Father. 2 words. Before the man from Nazareth opened his mouth, hardly anyone prayed like that, not in the ordinary, personal way he was about to. Not like this. Let me show you why those 2 words alone would have stopped that hillside silent. Picture what a prayer sounded like in that world. If you were a devout Jew in the 1st century, you prayed to Adonai, to Elohim, to the God whose real name, the 4 letters revealed to Moses at the burning bush, was so holy you would not let it cross your lips. When you reached that name in the text, you said a different word instead, because to speak the real one felt like touching something too hot to hold. That was the air these people breathed. God was vast. God was other. God was the voice that split mountains and the silence above the mercy seat, where no one but the high priest could go, and only once a year, and only with blood. And then a teacher from a nothing town in Galilee sits down in front of you and says, when you pray, call him Father. Not Almighty, not King of the universe, not Lord of hosts. Father. Now, you have to understand, this wasn't just informal. It was almost scandalous. Yes, the scriptures had, on rare occasions, reached for the image. Isaiah had dared to say, "Thou, O Lord, art our Father, our Redeemer." But that was a nation speaking about God, from a distance, the way you might call a king the father of his country. It was a title. It was poetry. It was kept at arm's length. What Jesus did was different, and the difference is everything. Because behind the Greek word for father that Matthew wrote down, scholars are nearly certain there stands an Aramaic word, the language Jesus actually spoke, the language of the home, and the kitchen, and the courtyard. And that word was Abba. Abba is not the language of the temple. It's the language of the home, the word a child uses for the father he trusts. It's closer to Papa than to father. Picture a child in the market, lifted onto a father's shoulders above the crowd, laughing down at him, and calling him that name. That is the register of the word. It's the word you'd cry out in the dark, when you were small, and afraid of the noise outside the window. It is warm, it is close, it is unbearably intimate. And Jesus takes that word, the word of a frightened child reaching for a parent, the word of a boy on his father's shoulders, and he hands it to a crowd of grown men and women and says, This is how you talk to the God who made the stars. Stay with that for a second. The distance that every religion on earth had built between the human being and the divine, the incense, the outer courts, the veils, the priests, the ranks of angels standing between you and the throne, Jesus collapses all of it into a single toddler's word. He doesn't lower God. He raises you. He looks at a farmer with cracked hands and a woman who has buried 3 children and a tax collector everyone despises, and he tells each of them, You may climb into his lap. No wonder they went quiet. But watch, he doesn't leave it there. Because if he stopped at Abba, you might walk away thinking God is only soft, only safe, a heavenly grandfather who exists to comfort you. So in the very same breath, he adds 4 words that pull the other direction, which art in heaven. Father, but in heaven, close enough to call Papa, high enough to be beyond your reach, both at once. This is the tension the whole prayer lives inside, and it never lets you resolve it in one direction. He is not a distant force you have to flatter and bribe, the way the pagans treated their gods, chanting names over and over trying to wake something up. And he is not a buddy, a mascot, a vending machine for your wishes. He is your Father, and he is in heaven. Tender and towering in the same sentence. Hold that thought, because it explains the line most people rush straight past. Hallowed be thy name. We say it like filler, like clearing our throat before the real requests. But it is not filler. It is the hinge the entire prayer swings on. The Greek word here is hagiostheto, and it's in a form English barely has a way to carry. It's a passive command. Not, I will hallow your name. Not, help me to honor you. It's closer to, let your name be made holy. Let it be hallowed by you. Here's what most people miss. Jesus is not asking the crowd to make God's name holy through their good behavior, as if the honor of the Almighty depended on how well they performed. He's reaching back to something the prophet Ezekiel had heard God say centuries earlier. I will sanctify my great name. I will. God himself is the one who acts. And so the very first request Jesus teaches you to make is not about your needs at all. It's a request that God would step into the world and make his own name blaze with the holiness it already has, that he would be seen for who he truly is. Think about what that does to you before you've asked for a single thing. The Pharisees, Jesus had just finished saying a moment earlier, loved to pray standing on the street corners, in the open, where the whole town could watch them be holy. Their prayers were performances. The spotlight pointed at the man praying. And here comes Jesus, and he spins the spotlight 180 degrees off of you and onto God. The Pharisee prayed so that he would be seen. Jesus teaches you to pray so that God would be seen. 3 lines in, and already he has changed how close you can come, who you're allowed to be when you come, and who the whole thing is actually about. And he's just getting started. Let me stop for just a moment, because I don't want you to miss how much ground we've already covered. 3 lines. That's all we've looked at. And in 3 lines, this prayer has already told you that you can call God Papa, that he is still the God enthroned above the heavens, and that the first thing on your lips should be his glory and not your wish list. 3 quiet lines, and every one of them turns something upside down. There are 4 lines left. And if you think the first 3 were bold, the next ones are where it gets dangerous, where Jesus tells this crowd to ask for something that, under the eyes of Rome, could get a person branded a traitor. So if this is opening something up in you, if you're hearing this prayer for the first time even, though you've said it 1,000 times, do me a favor and subscribe before we go on. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people who need to hear it. And stay to the end, because the strangest word in the entire prayer, the one no one can pin down for certain, is still waiting for us. All right, here's where we're going. In the next few minutes, a man is going to say 4 ordinary-sounding words that, in the wrong ears, could have marked him as disloyal to the empire. Then Jesus is going to reach for that strange, invented word I keep promising you, the one hiding in the line about bread. And then he's going to say something about forgiveness, so uncomfortable that most people quietly skip past it every time they pray. So stay with me. It starts with 3 words. Thy kingdom come. To understand why those words were dangerous, you have to know whose kingdom already ruled that hillside. Rome. And Rome was not shy about it. Reach into the pocket of anyone in that crowd and pull out a coin, and you'd be holding a small piece of propaganda. The emperor's face, stamped in silver, and around the edge, worn smooth by 100 hands, the titles, Divine, Son of God, Lord. On other coins, in other years, Savior of the world, Prince of Peace. Those weren't Christian phrases first. They were imperial ones. Long before anyone said them about Jesus, they were said about the man on the throne in Rome, and they were said everywhere. They were carved over the gates of cities. They were shouted by heralds in the marketplace. They were pressed into the very money that bought your bread. To live in that world was to be reminded, every time you made change at a stall, whose world it was. There was a Lord. There was a son of a God. And he was not the God of Israel. He was a man in a palace 1,500 miles away, who could have you killed with a single sentence, and who expected your gratitude for the privilege of living under him. So imagine the weight of it when a teacher tells you to look up past that palace, past that emperor, past every legion and every tax booth, and pray, let your kingdom come. Another kingdom, a different king, one whose reign would, one day, quietly outlast the one that looked like it would stand forever. This is not a metaphor. This is not a soft, private wish about feeling closer to God on a quiet morning. This is a man teaching ordinary people to pray, out loud, for the arrival of a government that would answer to no Caesar and to pray it, as casually as they asked for bread. And we know they took it exactly that seriously. We know because of a document most people have never heard of. There's an early Christian text called the Didache. The word just means the teaching, written down within a generation or two of Jesus himself, somewhere around the end of the 1st century. It's a kind of handbook for the first churches, how to live, how to eat, how to pray. And when it comes to this prayer, it gives one simple instruction. Say it 3 times a day, morning, midday, evening. Picture what that might have looked like. Imagine one of them. A man is working in a courtyard at noon, a leather worker, say, his hands dark, with tannin, the sun straight overhead. Rome is everywhere around him. There are soldiers at the end of the street. There is a shrine to the emperor near the forum, where you're expected to burn a pinch of incense and say the words out loud, Caesar is Lord. Everyone does it. It's just what you do, the way you'd nod to a magistrate. And this man sets down his tools, and quietly, under his breath, he says, Our Father, thy kingdom come. A different Lord, a different kingdom. He does it at dawn. He does it at noon. He does it again as the sun goes down. 3 times a day, every day, for the rest of his life. Nobody is watching. It changes nothing he can see. The empire is still there in the morning, as heavy and certain as ever. And he does it anyway, because he believes the words are true, and because a man who says thy kingdom come 3 times a day is a man who has already, in his heart, stopped belonging to Rome. That is what this line costs. That is what it meant. And then, right after asking for the whole world to be overturned, right after, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven, the prayer does something you would never expect. It gets small. Give us this day our daily bread. From the throne room of the universe to a loaf of bread on a wooden table. In a single line. And I love that turn because it tells you what kind of God this is. He is not too grand for your grocery list. The same prayer that reaches for the remaking of all creation bends down, in the very next breath, to care whether you have something to eat today. Not tomorrow's feast, not wealth, not a full storehouse. Bread. For today, you have to remember who was listening. These were people who lived close to the edge, day laborers who were paid at sundown, who, if no one hired them, that morning, watched their children go to bed hungry that night. When they heard, Give us this day our daily bread, they did not hear a poem. They heard their whole precarious life named out loud and placed into God's hands. Enough for today, and underneath it, the quiet trust that tomorrow you can come back and ask again. There's something almost defiant in that for us now. We are trained to want the storehouse, the savings, the security, the buffer thick enough that we never have to depend on anyone for anything. And here is a prayer that teaches you to ask for just enough, just for today, to live, on purpose, as someone whose Father feeds him one morning at a time. But here's what most people miss. That word, daily, is not really the word Jesus used. Or rather, no one is completely sure what word he used, because the Greek word sitting in that line is one of the strangest words in the entire Bible. Remember, back at the very beginning, I told you there was a word in this prayer that no one had ever written down before. A word that seems not to have existed in the Greek language until this prayer put it there. It's this one. It's been hiding in plain sight, right here, in the most ordinary line in the whole prayer. The line about bread. And I promised you we'd get to it. We're almost there. But to understand why it matters, we have to keep going, because the next line is where this prayer stops being comfortable and starts asking something of you that most people would rather not give. And forgive us our debts. Stay with me. This is where it gets personal. Look at that word. Debts. Not sins. Not mistakes. Not the times we fell short. Debts. And that is exactly the word Matthew wrote down, the Greek ophelimata, and it is not a soft, spiritual word. It is a word from the marketplace. It's what you owed the man you borrowed from. It's the number in the ledger with your name beside it. It's the debt that, if you couldn't pay it, could put you in prison or put your children into servitude to cover what you couldn't. And that is the word Jesus reaches for to describe what stands between you and God. Think about what that does to the picture. A sin we can hold at arm's length, a thing we did back there once and would rather not look at again. But a debt is a thing we owe. It's present tense. It doesn't stay in the past, where we left it. It sits on the books, in today's column, gathering weight, and it does not go away because you feel bad about it. Someone has to pay it, or someone has to cancel it. Jesus is telling you, in the plainest financial language a first-century ear could hear, you are in the red with heaven. You cannot cover the balance, and your only hope is a God who is willing to look at the ledger and take a pen and draw a line straight through the total. That alone would be enough to sit with. But then the prayer does something it does nowhere else. It adds a condition. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. As we forgive. And this is the one line, out of the whole prayer, that Jesus doubles back to explain once he's finished. He doesn't circle back to hallowed be thy name. He doesn't explain daily bread. But the moment he ends the prayer, he adds, for if ye forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if ye forgive not, he leaves the rest hanging over you. It is the most uncomfortable sentence in the prayer, because it takes the mercy you are so desperate to receive, and it ties it, knots it, to the mercy you are willing to give. The debt you want God to cancel, and the debt someone owes you. The same pen, the same line drawn through. Jesus will not let you pray for one while clutching the other. Now, we've kept a promise waiting long enough. Go back one line, back to the bread, because I told you, at the very start, that there was a word buried in this prayer that no one had ever written down before, and it's time to look at it. Give us this day our daily bread. That word daily, in Greek, it's Epiousios. And here's the strange thing. In all the Greek we have, thousands of documents, letters, receipts, poems, whole libraries of the ancient world, this word appears essentially nowhere outside of this prayer. It's as if it were made for this sentence and never used again. One of the greatest scholars of the early church, a man named Origen, writing about 200 years after Jesus, went looking for this word and admitted he couldn't find it anywhere. He concluded that the gospel writers must have coined it, invented it, reached for a meaning that no existing Greek word could carry, and built a new one to hold it. So what does it mean? Translators have argued for 2,000 years, and they still don't fully agree. Some read it as the bread we need to exist. Some as bread for the day ahead. But the reading that haunts me most, buried in the roots of the word, is this: not daily bread at all, but the bread of the coming day. Tomorrow's bread. Give us, today, the bread of tomorrow. Nobody can prove that's what he meant. But if it is, it may be the most quietly staggering line in the whole prayer. Sit with that. In a single invented word, Jesus may have folded the whole life of faith into one request. Give me, now, what I will need for what's coming. Let tomorrow's provision arrive in my hands today, so I can face the coming day without fear. It is trust, pressed into a word that did not exist until he needed it to. And then the prayer turns, one last time, toward the dark. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. That last phrase, evil, in the Greek can be read two ways, and the difference matters. The word carries a definite article, to poneru. It can mean evil in the abstract, or it can mean the evil one. A someone, not a something. And many scholars think that's the stronger reading. Deliver us from the evil one. If they're right, then this is not a prayer about avoiding bad luck. It is a soldier's prayer, whispered before dawn, a plea to be pulled out of the grip of a real enemy, by a father strong enough to do it. And that is where Jesus ends it, not with a triumph, with a cry for rescue, which is why those first Christians, saying this 3 times a day under the shadow of Rome, understood something we've nearly forgotten. Every time they reached the end, and said the word we tack on out of habit, amen, which simply means let it be so, I mean this, I stake my life on it, they were pledging allegiance. Not to Caesar, to a Father in heaven, a coming kingdom, a canceled debt, and a rescue they couldn't manage on their own. They meant it. They said it, into the worst the empire could do to them. And most of us say the very same words on autopilot, in the safety of a quiet room, without hearing a single one. So here's what you are actually holding. A handful of lines. A carpenter's son handed them to a crowd of tired people on a hillside, and every one of them was a small act of defiance. Call God Papa. Ask for a kingdom that answers to no emperor. Beg for tomorrow's bread today. Have your debt torn up, on the condition that you tear up the one owed to you. Be pulled by the hand out of the grip of the evil one. It is not a poem to recite. It is the whole of the gospel, folded small enough to carry in your mouth. But if you take one thing out of the last 25 minutes, let it be the word we waited the whole video to reach. Epiousios, the bread of the coming day. The word Jesus reached for, when no word existed, and had to make one. Because think about what he was really teaching you to ask for. He didn't teach you to ask for a storehouse, or a guarantee, or enough to never need him again. He taught you to ask, each morning, for tomorrow's bread, placed into today's hands. Which means you are allowed to wake up tomorrow, without carrying it yet. You do not have to hold the weight of a future you cannot see. Your Father is already holding it. And every day you pray this prayer, you are handing it back to him, one morning at a time, and asking only for enough to make it through the day in front of you. That is what he was teaching you to say, not words to get through, a way to be carried. So let me ask you before you go. Of all 7 lines, the Father, the name, the kingdom, the bread, the debt, the rescue, which one landed hardest on you? Which one did you never really hear until now? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and I think the one you choose is going to say a lot about where each of us is standing right now. And the next time you say this prayer, in a church, at a funeral, at the edge of your own bed in the dark, do me one favor. Slow down. You are not reciting something old and safe. You are holding a bomb with a 2,000-year fuse, and it is still lit.